If you are interested in diving into some classic death metal, but don't know where to start, well, you're in luck. Because with this list of albums, I have done the unthinkable. Actually, everyone has done this before me, but this is the correct list. I will mostly be focusing on the classics as a ground zero, as I see this as more like a crash course, along with a gateway to what is, by and large, a difficult music genre to jump into. I still try to throw in some curveballs, and especially when we get to the honourable mentions, I will shout out some more modern acts that also deserve your attention. The Death Metal Starter Pack. Starting with Death, Human, 1991. Couldn't ignore some Chuck Schuldiner worship. The choice for most would either be one of their 80s albums, as while this music wasn't created in a vacuum, nothing embodied the sound, image, and production like Leprosy or Scream Bloody Gore did. The reason I'm leaning towards Human is that this was the first album that dove into more explorative and progressive songwriting, a direction Death would venture into for the rest of their career. That, and it's more succinct at only 34 minutes when compared to the denser albums like Sound of Perseverance. On the whole, if you want the best Death albums, in my opinion, the even-numbered ones are the best. Morbid Angel, Altars of Madness, 1989. For the classic lineup of Trey Azagthoth on guitar, David Vincent on bass and vocals, and Pete Sandoval on drums, it was really a coin flip between this and the more refined Covenant, but I had to settle for the debut due to both its importance and its manic energy. When we talk about trendsetters in music, all members being recognizable and influential names to a genre, and with albums like this, Morbid Angel make themselves known as death metal trailblazers that are just as important as Death. Also, a recurring theme you'll see on most of the artwork on this list is the beautiful paintings done by Dan Seagrave, an awesome name, I know. His artwork is just synonymous with these bands. Entombed, Left Hand Path, 1990. Yeah, I couldn't avoid this one. Another obvious pick, Swedish masters and one of the titans in the legendary Stockholm death metal scene. Infamous for that classic HM2 guitar tone, sonically distinct from the aforementioned Floridian bands. Also the amazing production by Thomas Skogsberg, pretty much the Swedish equivalent to Scott Burns, producing albums by Entombed, Dismember, Carnage, and Grave. Nocturnus, The Key, 1990. This is an underrated concept album following a figure going back in time to kill Jesus Christ. As you do. Naturally, due to the concept album would have sci-fi keyboards just coating this thing. The playing on this is tight as a futuristic hell, there's banger riffs all over it, and what really brings out something that many modern sci-fi tech death bands simply can't do. It doesn't feel like math equations. Instead, it's fun and vicious in equal measure. The keys add an extra melodic dimension to it, while also giving it an otherworldly atmosphere. Really good as a change of pace. Pestilence, Testimony of the Ancients, 1991. Now we come to our Dutch representation. Pestilence are an OG of death metal, and much like Death, took on more progressive tendencies on their third full-length. The result is an album more nimble, explorative, and tighter. Plus the interludes act as these little breathers that make this more accessible than the more involved efforts like the 80s albums. Malevolent Creation, Retribution, 1992. Yeah, this one gets in purely because it's so badass. Murder, murder, murder. Nothing particularly new or groundbreaking compared to what came before it, especially in this list, but nevertheless, it is a well-executed slice of traditional death metal. This one grooves so hard and switches to lightning fast with just ease. So many cool sections packed into these songs and killer production, thanks again to Scott Burns. Add to this, once again, a great painting by Dan Seagrave adorning the cover, and you have everything awesome about that early 90s death metal scene. Cynic, Focus, 1993. A full-on collision of death metal meets jazz fusion, utilizing odd, ever-changing rhythms and unconventional melodies, but within a death metal framework. Atheist does this to a similar extent, but don't go to the polls as Cynic does. Plus, the vocal effects make this a wholly unique listen. Highly recommended, along with their initial reunion albums. Progressive death metal that doesn't quite feel quantized like modern acts, so the sound is easier to the ears and accessible for extended periods of time, as long as you're prepared for the weirdness. Suffocation, Pierced from Within, 1995. The essential brutal death metal band, a better jumping on point than the awesome debut Effigy of the Forgotten, due to more groovy sections and beefier production. Yes, Mike Smith isn't on this one, but Doug Bone does a stellar job replacing the legendary drummer behind the kit. Pierced from Within also features these real slow motion breakdowns, which break it up quite nicely, plus a larger emphasis on the riff and hooks. The album is both crushing and technical, an important distinction to make, as to some who find this stuff to be just chaotic noise, is completely antithetical to what death metal actually is. Bolt Thrower, Those Once Loyal, 2005. The Bolt Thrower's sound was truly forged with the Fourth Crusade, and then mastered with their final album, Those Once Loyal. Choosing to write these slow, groovy metal songs instead of drowning the listener in spiraling time changes or pummeling blast beats, this Coventry-based band that called it quits when they felt like they had finally mastered their unique sonic force, compiling it into a lean final note to a great run. True artists in every sense of the word. Necrot, Blood Offerings, 2017. If I had to pick something modern for this first selection, way more primitive despite being made within the past 10 years, a far more primal album compared to the spiraling sounds of, say, Malevolent Creation or Pestilence, but no less thunderous. There are plenty of giant modern death metal albums, but I think this is the easiest entry point for newbies. Having the sound be less tuned up makes this so much more appealing for repeated listens, in a similar fashion to what the Enforced albums are for modern thrash. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to leave you with just those 10. Here are basically the honourable mentions, the next 10 that I would say are a good next step into the world of death metal. Obituary. Cause of Death, 1990. This is as bare bones as you can get, and by and large, slower and with a punk-like simplicity. Played masterfully tight though, which does make it easier to nod your head to. One-time guitar legend James Murphy really takes these songs up a step with his incredible guitar solos. John Tardy is this real distinctive vocal delivery, which has always helped Obituary be as recognizable as they are. One of those OG death metal bands from Florida that could make a case for being in a big four alongside Morbid Angel and Death due to both influence and longevity. Dismember, Like an Ever-Flowing Stream, 1991. Like Entombed, a classic of the Swedish death metal scene, shorter than Left Hand Path, but no less packs a punch. Massive Killing Capacity comes recommended too, and an example of these Swedish legends writing really good death and roll, taking death metal and mixing it with pure hard rock. Except I find Massive Killing Capacity to be a more successful attempt than Entombed's Wolverine Blues, even though Wolverine Blues is still a lot of fun. Actually, as a full discography, I find Dismember to be more consistent than Entombed on the whole. Atheist, Unquestionable Presence, 1991. What is probably the best Atheist album. Again, it's some awesome jazz fusion meets death metal, much like Cynic, except all of the prog and jazz fusion works alongside the death metal simultaneously, full of ever-changing rhythms and unpredictable change-ups. It's an album not focused on being blasphemous or pulverizing like, say, Suffocation or Entombed, but instead to show off, as it were. Solstice, self-titled, 1992. This isn't the UK doom metal band. Instead, this is an act from the US. At a time when thrash's relevance had waned, bands either followed the dominant forms of heavy music at the time, going in an alternative or groove metal direction, or especially for the younger bands like Sadus, Demolition Hammer and Morbid Saint, started to inject death metal into their thrash to compete with the underground. Solstice is one of the finest examples of this philosophy. Benediction, Transcend the Rubicon, 1993. Definitely the best album from this band's classic era. Another group from my country, like Bolt Thrower, but nowhere near as well known. Speaking of which, Dave Ingram, who does vocals on here, replaced the awesome Carl Willits in Bolt Thrower for an album. Gorguts, The Erosion of Sanity, 1993. The earlier albums of this Canadian death metal crew are way better introductions than the esoteric and avant-garde-minded Obscura. These two are way more straightforward, but still complex, especially The Erosion of Sanity, which is my personal favourite of the two. Nihil, Annihilation of the Wicked, 2005. Some really catchy brutal death metal, utilising Egyptian themes in their music, embracing subtle embellishments and acoustic sections that add spice to the raw, complex and fast riffs and drums that envelop them. Black Royal, Fire Bride, 2020. Some great death and roll with a heavy stoner metal feel. These guys sadly haven't performed outside of Finland, so their reach has been fairly stifled. You have some oddball instruments like strings thrown in, yet I wouldn't consider this to be a symphonic metal album. The bluesier, scroovier riffs might appeal over the speed and technicality of other bands. Blood Incantation, Absolute Elsewhere, 2024. Yes, an obvious and recent pick, but the genre blend of psychedelic prog with death metal is a recipe that is so finely walked and smoothly executed that I can't help but recommend this to newcomers. And finally, Ancient Death, Ego Disillusion, 2025. Really tasteful lead work on this one, plus the use of dynamics are a welcome change to those who don't want the sheer chaos all of the time. This really rewards being patient because the material here is surprisingly catchy alongside a really palpable atmosphere. I really should have included this on my year-end list. Death metal is a sound that you can't even begin to approach like traditional metal. You have to almost treat it like it's jazz in how complex the structures are and how you just kind of gotta let go over it. The other hurdle is, of course, the vocals. Just remember two things. It is possible to healthily produce that sound and just treat it as its own instrument rather than traditional singing to connect with. And that's all I wrote for that. This is a hopefully helpful guide in getting into death metal as a genre, using 20 albums, a nice broad selection, I hope. And I understand that I deliberately avoided talking about melodic death metal, as I found that would be cheating, because bands like Soilwork, Arch Enemy, In Flames, Dark Tranquillity, Amon Amarth, Insomnium, Children of Bodom, yeah, these bands might be quote-unquote easier to get into, but I think it would be kind of just cheating compared to the actual death metal that exists. Don't get me wrong, I love me some melodic death metal, but it's just not the real thing, you know? As always, I'm open to hearing your opinions in the comment section below of bands and albums you think I should have included in this list, or groups that you think would be better introductions as a whole. As always, please let me know in the comment section below, and I will see you guys in the next video.